A logical fallacy is a flaw in reasoning. Logical fallacies are like tricks or illusions of thought, and they are often very sneakily used by politicians and the media to fool people. Don't be fooled. This website has been designed to help you identify and call out dodgy logic wherever it may raise its ugly, incoherent head. Roll over the icons above and click for examples. If you see someone committing a fallacy, link them to it. For instance, logical fallacy strawman. Strawman. You misrepresented someone's argument to make it easier to attack. By exaggerating, misrepresenting, or just completely fabricating someone's argument, it's much easier to present your own position as being reasonable. But this kind of dishonesty serves to undermine honest, rational debate. Example: after Will said that we should put more money into health and education, Warren responded by saying that he was surprised that Will hates our country so much that he wants to leave it defenseless by cutting military spending. False cause. You presume that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. Many people confuse correlations, things happening together or in sequence, for causation. That one thing actually causes the other to happen. Sometimes correlation is coincidental, or it may be attributable to a common cause. Example: pointing out to a fancy chart, Roger shows how temperatures had been rising over the past few centuries, whilst at the same time the numbers of pirates have been decreasing. Thus, the pirates cooled the world and global warming is a hoax. Appeal to emotion. You attempted to manipulate an emotional response in place of valid or compelling argument. Appeals to emotions include appeals to fear, envy, hatred, pity, pride, and more. It's important to note that sometimes a logically coherent argument may inspire emotion or have an emotional aspect, but the problem and fallacy occurs when emotion is used instead of a logical argument, or to obscure the fact that no compelling rational reason exists for one's position. Everyone, except sociopaths, are affected by emotion, and so appeals to emotions are a very common and effective argument tactic, but they are ultimately flawed, dishonest, and tend to make one's opponents justifiably emotional. Example: Luke didn't want to eat his sheep's brain with chopped liver and Brussels sprouts, but his father told him to think about the poor, starving children in a third world country who weren't fortunate enough to have any food at all. The fallacy. You presume that because a claim has been poorly argued or a fallacy has been made, that the claim itself must be wrong. It is entirely possible to make a claim that is false, yet argue with logical coherency for that claim, just as it is possible to make a claim that is true and justify it with various fallacies and poor arguments. Example: recognizing that Amanda had committed a fallacy in arguing that we should eat more healthy food because a nutritionist said it was popular. Alice said we should therefore eat bacon double cheeseburgers every day. A slippery slope. You said that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. The problem with the reasoning is that it avoids engaging with the issue at hand and instead shifts the attention to extreme hypotheticals. Because no proof is presented to show that such extreme hypotheticals will in fact occur, this fallacy has the form of an appeal to emotion fallacy by leveraging fear. In effect, The argument at hand is unfairly tainted by unsubstantiated conjecture. For example, Colin Closet asserted that if we allow same-sex couples to marry, then the next thing we know, we will be allowing people to marry their parents, their cars, and even monkeys. Ad hominem. You attacked your opponent's character or personal traits in an attempt to undermine his argument or her argument. And ad hominem attacks can take the form of overtly attacking someone, or more subtly, causing doubt on their character or personal attributes as a way to discredit the argument. The results of an ad hominem attack can be to undermine someone's case without actually having to engage with it. Example, after Sally presented an eloquent and compelling case for a more equitable taxation system, Sam asked the audience whether we should believe anything from a woman who isn't married, was once arrested, and smells a little bit weird. To croak or to quokey, you avoided having to engage you with criticism by turning it back to the accuser. You answered criticism with criticism. Pronouns to quokey, literally translating as you too, is fallacy. This fallacy is also known as the appeal to hypocrisy. It is commonly employed as an effective red herring because it takes the heat off someone having to defend the argument and instead shifts the focus back onto the person making the criticism. Example, Nicole identified that Hannah had committed a logical fallacy, but instead of addressing the substance of her claim, Hannah accused Nicole of committing a fallacy earlier on in the conversation. Personal incredulity. Because you found something difficult to understand or are unaware of how it works, you made out like it's probably not true. Complex subjects like biological evolution through natural selection require some amount of understanding before one is able to make an informed judgment about that subject at hand. This fallacy is usually used in place of that understanding. I don't understand, therefore it is not real. Example, Kirk drew a picture of a fish and a human, and with effusive disdain asked Richard if he really thought we were stupid enough to believe that a fish somehow turned into a human through just like random things happening over time. Special pleading. You moved a goalpost or made up an exception when your claim was shown to be false. Humans are funny creatures and have a foolish aversion to being wrong. Rather than appreciate the benefits of being able to change one's mind through better understanding, many will invent ways to cling to old views. One of the most common ways that people do this is to post-rationalize a reason why what they thought to be true must remain to be true. It is usually very easy to find a reason to believe something that suits you, and it requires integrity and genuine honesty with oneself to examine one's own beliefs and motivation before falling into the trap to justifying our existing ways of seeing ourselves and the world around us. Example, Edward Jones claimed to be a psychic, but when his abilities were tested under proper scientific conditions, they magically disappeared. Edward explained this, saying that one had to have faith in his ability for them to work. Loaded question. You asked a question that had a presumption built into it so that it couldn't be answered without appearing guilty. Loaded question fallacies are particularly effective at derailing rational debates because of their inflammatory nature. The recipient of the loaded question is compelled to defend themselves and may appear flustered or on the back foot. Example: Grace and Helen were both romantically interested in Brad. One day, with Brad sitting within earshot, Grace asked in an inquisitive tone whether Helen was still having troubles with her drug habit. Burden of proof. You said that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove. The burden of proof lies with someone who is making a claim and is not upon anyone else to disprove. The inability or disinclination to disprove that claim does not render that claim invalid, nor give it any credence whatsoever. However, it is important to note that we can never be certain of anything, and so we must assign a value to any claim based on the available evidence. And to dismiss something on the basis that it has been proven beyond all doubt is also a fallacious reasoning. Example: Bertrand declares that a teapot is at this very moment in orbit around the Sun, between the Earth and Mars, and that because no one can prove him wrong, his claim is therefore a valid one. Ambiguity. You used a double meaning or ambiguity of language to mislead or misrepresent the truth. Politicians are often guilty in using ambiguity to mislead and will later point to how they were technically not outright lying if they come under scrutiny. The reason that it qualifies as a fallacy is that it is intrinsically misleading. For example, when the judge asked the defendant why he hadn't paid his parking fines, he said that he shouldn't have to pay them because the sign said "fine for parking here", so he naturally presumed that it would be fine to park there. The gambler's fallacy. You said that runs occur to statistically independent phenomena, such as roulette wheel spins. This commonly believed fallacy can be said to have helped create an entire city in the desert of Nevada, USA. Though the overall odds of a big run happening may be low, each spin of the wheel is itself entirely independent from the last. So whilst there may be a very small chance that heads will come up 20 times in a row, if you flip a coin, the chances of heads coming up on each individual flip remains 50-50 and aren't influenced by what happened before. Example: red had come up 6 times in a row on the roulette wheel, so Greg knew that it was close to certain that black would be next up, suffering an economic form of natural selection. With this thinking, he soon lost all of his savings. Bandwagon. Ad populum. You appealed to popularity or the fact that many people do something as an attempted form of validation. The flaw in this argument is that the popularity of an idea has absolutely no bearing on its validity. If it did, then the earth would have made itself flat for most of history to accommodate this popular belief. Example: Seamus pointed a drunken finger at Sean and asked him to explain how so many people could believe in leprechauns if they are only a silly old superstition. Sean, however, had a few too many beers himself and fell off his chair. Appeal to authority. Magister dixit. You said that because an authority thinks something, it must therefore be true. It's important to note that this fallacy should not be used to dismiss the claims of experts or scientific consensus. Appeals to authority are not valid arguments, but nor it is reasonable to disregard the claims of experts who have demonstrated depth of knowledge unless one has a similar level of understanding and or access to empirical evidence. However, it is entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution of authority is wrong. Therefore, the authority that such a person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether their claims are true or not. Example, not able to defend his position that evolution isn't true, Bob says that he knows a scientist who also questions the evolution and presumably isn't a primate. Composition division. You assume that one part of something has to be applied to all or other parts of it, or that the whole must apply to its part. Often when something is true for the part, it does also applies to the whole, or vice versa. But the crucial difference is whether there exists good evidence to show that this is the case. Because we observe consistencies in things, our thinking can become biased so that we presume consistency to exist where it does not. Example, Daniel was a precocious child and had a liking for logic. He reasoned that atoms are invisible and that he was made of atoms and therefore invisible too. Unfortunately, despite his thinking skills, he lost the game of hide and go seek. No true Scotsman. You made what could be called an appeal to purity as a way to dismiss relevant criticisms or flaws of your argument. In this form of faulty reasoning, one's belief is rendered unfalsifiable because no matter how compelling the evidence is, one simply shifts the goalpost so that it wouldn't apply to a supposedly true example. This kind of post-rationalization is a way of avoiding valid criticism of one's argument. Example, Angus declared that Scotsmen do not put sugar on their porridge, to which Lackland points out that he is a Scotsman and puts sugar on his porridge. Furious, like a true Scot, Angus yelled that no true Scotsman sugars his porridge. Genetic. You judge something as either good or bad on the basis of where it comes from, or from whom it came. This fallacy avoids the argument by shifting focus on something or someone's origins. It's similar to an ad hominem fallacy in that it leverages existing negative perceptions to make someone's argument look bad, without actually presenting a case for why the argument itself lacks merit. Example, accused on the 6 o'clock news of corruption and taking bribes, the senator said that we should all be very wary on the things we hear in the media because we all know how very unreliable the media can be. Black or white? False dilemma. False dichotomy. You presented two alternative states as the only possibilities, when in fact more possibilities exist, also known as the false dilemma. This insidious tactic has the appearance of forming a logical argument, but under closer scrutiny it becomes evident that there are more possibilities than the either or choice that is presented. Binary, black or white thinking doesn't allow for the many different variables, conditions, and contexts in which there would exist more than more than just the two possibilities put forth. It frames the argument misleadingly and obscures rational, honest debate. Example: whilst rallying support for his plan to fundamentally undermine citizens' rights, the supreme leader told the people that they were either on his side or they were on the side of the enemy. Begging the question: circular argument. You presented a circular argument in which the conclusion was included in the premise. This logically incoherent argument often arises in situations where people have an assumption that is very ingrained and therefore taken in their minds as a given. Circular reasoning is bad mostly because it is not very good. Example: the word of Sorbo the Great is flawless and perfect. We know this because it says so in the great and infallible book of Sorbo's best and most truest things that are definitely true and should not be ever questioned. Should not ever be questioned. Appeal to nature, the naturalist fallacy. You argued that because something is natural, it is therefore valid, justified, and inevitable, or good or ideal. Many natural things are also considered good, and this can bias our thinking, but naturalness itself doesn't make something good or bad. For instance, murder could be seen as very natural, but that doesn't mean it's good or justifiable. Example: the medicine man rolled into town on his bandwagon offering various natural remedies, such as the very special plain water. He said that it was only natural that people should be wearing of artificial medicine, such as antibiotics. Anecdotal: you use a personal experience or an isolated example instead of a sound argument or compelling evidence. It's often much easier for people to believe someone's testimony as opposed to understanding complex data and variation across a continuum. Quantitative scientific measures are almost always more accurate than personal perceptions and experiences, but our inclination is to believe that which is tangible to us and or the word of someone we trust over a more abstract statistical reality. Example: Jason said that that was cool, that was all cool and everything, but his grandparents smoked like 30 cigarettes a day and lived until 97 years. So don't believe everything you read about meta-analysis of methodologically sound studies showing proven causal relationships. The Texas sharpshooter. You cherry-picked a data cluster to suit your argument or found a pattern to fit a presumption. This false cause fallacy is coined after a marksman shooting randomly at barns and then painting bullseye targets around the spot where the most bullet holes appear, making it appear making it cacophony, making it appear as if he is a really good shot. Clusters naturally appear by chance, but don't necessarily indicate that there is a causal relationship. Example: the markers of sugarette candy drinks point to research showing that of 5 countries where sugarette drink sells the most units, 3 of them are in the top 10 healthiest countries on earth. Therefore, sugarette drinks are healthy. Confirmation bias. Texas sharpshooter confirmation bias. The middle ground. You claim that a compromise or middle point between two extremes must be the truth. Much of the time, the truth does indeed lie between two extreme points, but this can bias our thinking. Sometimes a good thing is simply Sometimes a thing is simply untrue and a compromise of it is also false. Halfway between truth and a lie is still a lie. Example: Holly said that vaccination caused autism in children, but her scientifically well read friend Caleb said that this claim had been debunked and proven false. Their friend Alice offered a compromise that vaccinations must cause some autism, but not all autism.